Hi everyone. I've got Kieron back because I'm quite interested in eclipses, and I've noticed that eclipses, there's quite a few coming up in the next month or so. And we're recording this, I think it's April the 16th or 15th. So I've asked for Kieron Devlin to come back on from Proteus Astrology because I need to be explained what are eclipses and what are their significance in an astrological term. Obviously, I understand what an eclipse is uh, as a as a body, one body of planets over another. But maybe you'd like to inform us what the significance of an eclipse is in astrological.
Yeah,
So thank you for coming back, Kieron.
thanks for inviting me back. Um, Eclipses are an enigma, aren't they? So this is the thing. That's what fascinates me about them, that we can see them sometimes, but we're still not quite sure what they mean. And so you can look at them on two different levels, I suppose. The astronomical level, just the physical objects in space, the moon blocking out the sun, for example, or the other way around, the Earth blocking out the moon. And then you can look at the astrological significance as well. So, I mean, there's such a lot to say about eclipses. They're quite a complex topic. So, but we are just about to have an eclipse next Thursday. So what I would say is they're not necessarily scary, although, historically they have been associated with the death of kings, or the jostling for power of the leadership, because the sun represents the leadership. In mundane astrology, that relates to world affairs only. There's a specific traditional style of analysis that goes on, and I do that sometimes. I wouldn't designate myself specifically as a mundane astrologer, but I think eclipses fascinate everybody. And we've only got four this, so it's not particularly unusual this year. We've got four, which is a kind of average number. Some years they have five or six, even seven. So I think the maximum is seven, and that was back in 1982. In 2020 and also in 2021, there were six. So you could think, well, those years may have been more charged with energy for transformational power, and I certainly agree that, well, I think it's true to say 2001 and 2020, over the past 2 decades, have been the most momentous years for changing the world, or changing the perspective we have on the world. So I think, yeah, you can't argue with that. It could be
And I think
related.
1983 was as well, actually. I remember quite a lot was going on then. We kind of come to the end of the Cold War. We had Reagan and I've forgotten the
Yeah,
Russian guy and all that going on, and
Gorbachev.
yeah, Gorbachev and things. So
Yeah,
1984, I'm sure you said 83, didn't you?
82.
82. Okay,
82. But I think you might be thinking about 89, because that's when the Cold War ended and the wall in Berlin came down.
oh, okay.
Yeah, there was quite a confluence of aspects there. I think Saturn and Pluto. But
Oh.
so back to eclipses. Well, they belong in cycles, so you could go into the detail. They go in 18 or 19-year cycles. I think this one, that next Thursday, is a solar eclipse, and then on May the 5th we've got a lunar eclipse. They always happen in pairs within about 2 weeks of each other. And you could, pass your whole life not noticing that eclipses have happened. I have to say, it all depends on whether you're attuned to the energies. But I think we're certainly feeling at the moment that there's a lot of change going on. And so we might look to the eclipses for signature information about why it's happening right now, or what's going to happen. And there's what they call an activation period. So some people say it's 2 weeks before and after. Some people say 6 months before and after. Some people say you've got to look at an 18-year cycle, go back to the first eclipse. That's like they go in families, just like the moon goes in families. So you can check the cycles over long periods of time. But this one coming up, is at 29 degrees of Aries. So, I can talk a little bit more about that. Just from the point of view of my personal experience of eclipses, didn't really pay that much attention to them, actually, to be honest, except for the fact that, if I ever got a chance to see them, and I think that is the amazing thing, you can go and witness an eclipse with your own eyes. They're not always easy to see. You have to sometimes travel to go to the right place to see them. You have to be under what they call the direct path, because you won't get a full view of the totality if you're not in the direct path. So there was a famous one in 1999 in Leo, and I remember I was in Saudi Arabia then, and I was looking out of my balcony window. I saw a very vague, I didn't see the totality of it, but what was significant was that it was close to a degree in my chart. So even though I wasn't fully following astrology then, I realized there was something important about that eclipse for my journey that year. And certainly a lot of things changed that year for me. I left, I moved to New York, I took up a whole new course. There were major changes. And that's the thing to look out for. So if you know your own chart, this is what I would advise, they could pass by without much effect upon you, upon your life. But if you know your chart, you can check if they fall on the exact degree of your sun, for example, then that means you would be affected by that eclipse the whole year.
So this one that's coming up, because that's going to be Aries.
It's at 29 degrees of Aries.
So people with either Aries sun sign or quite a strong Aries positioning in their chart.
It'll trigger all the Aries themes, but you might not have any planets at 29 degrees of Aries. So it wouldn't be exact. So you have to say the orb, we call it 3 degrees close, would have a direct impact on you. But it could be another planet there. It might not be your sun. It might be Mars, or it might be Venus or Mercury, because those could be close if you're born in the sign of Aries. So you have to check, and also you have to check the house. So I can't get into that much detail. When there's a lot of astrologers online now, they're going through all the signs, but that's a generic system based on the ascendant of that sign and the relationship. It's still valid. It's still very valid, but I think you get more precise information if you look at your own chart and you have that in front of you. There was an eclipse here that was visible in London in 2015, and I remember going up to Primrose Hill with some friends, having a picnic of it. Loads of people were out there. But as you know, British weather famously was clouded over. You couldn't really see anything dramatic. But what I noticed was that it was energetically very dramatic, because at the moment of the eclipse, I think it was about 2-3 minutes long. Some of them are long, some of them are short. The temperature dropped so dramatically, quickly, and it was dark and overcast and freezing cold. And it was like being plunged into a kind of abyss. Even though you couldn't see it, you could feel that temperature drop was a definite physical effect that you could, feel. And then there was the famous solar eclipse of December 14th, 2020, which was, if you follow the path of the eclipse as well, you can say that country is going to be more affected. And that went over Argentina. And that was the time that Maradona, the famous footballer, died. Oh. Now, I'm not saying that there's a direct link between death, because people are dying all the time. We've had quite a few famous people. Mary Quant died 2 days ago. And Paul O'Grady died, Ryuichi Sakamoto died. It's not necessarily linked to the eclipse, but because the eclipses are linked to the nodal return, so if you understand, the nodes are the intersection points between the path of the sun and the moon and the earth in their rotation around each other, then you could argue, if there's a combination of an eclipse and a close nodal point to a nodal point in your chart, then definitely something could be indicated there in the chart. So let's talk about this just a little bit more about that one eclipse. There was another eclipse actually there was one on 2017 called the Great American Eclipse, and that went right across America, United States, I mean, the northern continent. And there'll be a second one to follow, going more or less the same path next year on April 8th, 2024.
Oh,
So that's very, very dramatic. And we know what's happening in the United States. I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but there have been dramatic changes going on. And some people would argue, yeah, it's sandwiched between these two eclipses from 2017 to 2024. And that happens to be the year of the next election, doesn't it? So, and then on December 14th, which happened to be on my sun, 2020, there was an eclipse, which marked the exact midpoint between that first eclipse and the second eclipse. So you can get into the whole story of these eclipses. They each come with a different paradigm or a story attached to them, depending on the location. But I think what is very, very interesting that it follows more or less the same path as the one in 2017. And a lot of people are already planning now to book their hotels to be in the direct path. Literally, it divides right across the United States, right through Texas. And it's a long one as well. So that's another important thing. So I think a lot of people will be out to watch that eclipse next year.
It's quite unusual for two. I know it's only a few years difference, but to still follow the same path, isn't it?
It's not exactly the same. It's more or less the same. Yeah, it's
okay.
Yeah, very often these eclipses, they're not visible because they're in remote parts of Polynesia or the Arctic. You just can't get to see them. Or they're on the edges of continents. They're not really very visible. So that makes an eclipse so much more dramatic and impactful if you can actually, you're in the country that you live in and you can see it and it's over your country. So it's more likely to have a greater impact on that country. But I think we all feel them, there are eclipse fanatics who just follow all the eclipses and try to go and I don't blame them really, because it is phenomenal if you can actually make a video or witness a full eclipse. Imagine, that's the sun going out for 3 or 4 minutes long, but when it's covered by the moon. So this first one is coming up next Thursday. A solar eclipse, that's a new moon eclipse. That's normally there's a period of 3 days when it's dark, because that every 28, 27 days, that's what happens. The moon goes dark because it's not visible. So and then it reappears, and they call that the new moon. But if it's on the nodes, that's what we notice. The eclipse that happens connected to the nodes. So this one is at the very end degree. There's a whole theory about the last degree, 29 degrees, that's called the anaretic degree. So that's the cumulative fated impact of everything that anyone learns in the sign of Aries. So Aries, as you probably know, is related to independence, directness. They're very direct, they're very fast. So it's related to this energy of connecting more to your Aryan archetype. And everyone has Aries in their chart. There may not be an Aries sun sign, but you have Aries in your chart somewhere. And that will be where it affects you. But I think what this is telling us is that we have to go with our own instinct more, trust ourselves more. It could be challenging for some people, but if you're already doing that, I don't think that would be particularly challenging. So I'm not thinking in terms of really dramatic events, although we've had quite a few dramatic events anyway, in spite of the eclipses. So I don't think we could, they're omens, but they're not necessarily bad omens. It could be a good thing. It could be that you really need to be told by your guardian spirit that you need to be more independent, that you need to let go of all the stuff that you used to hold on to, ideas, beliefs, or whatever it was, and go your own way.
Don't be a sheep, be a ram. Because rams are the ones that can go anywhere, aren't they?
Yeah, but they also butt heads. So
Yeah.
there's always a balance. You have to see the balance. So what I would say is be independent, but not too independent, because there's Chiron is in Aries at the moment. So that's the wounded healer. So that's a very sensitive point, or a teaching point, where you're processing deeper traumas and learning from those traumas, and perhaps becoming a teacher of being able to help others because you've been through that particular painful experience yourself. And it's going to be square to Mars. Mars is the ruler of the eclipse, and Mars is in Cancer at the moment. So that's a very emotional place for Mars to be. So there could be some sensitive realizations, maybe uncomfortable, but they're probably necessary, I would think. Yeah, necessary. It's just a clearing out of old junk, as they say, junk in the trunk. The stuff that you probably haven't dealt with, that needs dealing with in order to make your way, smooth your way forward. And some people find that easier to handle, and other people, because they're stuck in a rut, or they haven't really done any work on themselves very much, could find that challenging. Or that I think, was it Jung who said, if you don't deal with your unconscious drives, they manifest in life as fate. And I think that is very true. Some events start happening to tell you, you've got to shift this, you've got to move that, you've got to change here, you've got to let that go. So I think it's good to be aware of that. The only thing that would be possibly negative is that this eclipse is square to Pluto. Pluto's just moved to the 0-degree point of Aquarius, which means 29 degrees is at the end of Aries, the beginning of Taurus. That means it's a square relationship. So that could bring a lot more intensity to it. But again, it's all about these transformational issues, like shifting deeper stuff, working on your deep psychological problems and traumas, and figuring them out and dealing with them, or facing up to stuff that you haven't dealt with before. Just clarifying it. And then you're ready to make the changes needed. I think Pluto is also collective energy. It's not necessarily a personal energy. It affects everybody in every generation. It stays, over 20 years in a sign. So it's
You were
potent.
saying this could start a few days before. It doesn't necessarily start on the eclipse day, right? Because these things you're saying I've had in the last few days. And I've been
Yes.
thinking, why is this? But
No,
now
I
you
think
said all that, it's like,
this is the paradox. The day itself might be very calm and pass without any event. And everybody will be thinking, what the hell are those astrologers talking about? Nothing happened on that day. It's not necessarily that day. Remember, there's a trigger point for the degrees. So some say that when the sun is 19 degrees close, within 19 degrees of the nodal point, then that's the period of activation. So you look for 2 weeks before, 2 weeks after, usually around 2 weeks. I think around about April 6th, it might have started triggering. But I think, it's like a preview of a film, it's coming. So the mind or the unconscious starts fomenting stuff that comes to the surface. So I think that anyone who's sensitive to these things would know that, and they would be noticing synchronicities already happening, things clearing out, I think. Because remember, it's if you do get a chance to see an eclipse, it's on a new moon, it would be the moon blocking out the sun, which is phenomenal, really. I mean, you think the moon is small and the sun is big, but because of its distance, if it's so close, I think, I don't know the exact distance, but it can fill the entire disk of the sun. And if the sun represents yourself and your purpose, that's like a start, a focus point, or a magnifying glass on the issues of your core self to be blotted out. And also bringing up the shadow, because it brings a kind of shadow with it. And it can have sudden electrifying effects, like a Uranus transit. That's why they say it affects leaders, because the sun is associated with kings, presidents, prime ministers, and so forth. But this eclipse is going to be visible over Papua New Guinea, Northwest Australia. We won't see it here in the UK.
But we'll still have the effects of it.
Well, we might feel it, yeah, because
Mm.
and especially if it's got any connection in your chart, you'll definitely feel it, but we won't be able to see it. And even over there, then if the weather is not good, if it's not clear, then still won't be able to see it. It's only if it's clear sky that they'll be able to see the full dramatic effect of the sun being blotted out. But the other thing that's significant about this one is that it marks two other points like quickly after. So it's the end of Ramadan. I don't know if your viewers know that
Mhm.
that's the fasting month for the whole of Islam, the whole world of Islam, which is right across Indonesia as well. So that could be significant over there. And there is actually some earthquake activity in Indonesia. There always is, but it could be extra pronounced if there's an eclipse there, that it might also trigger earthquakes as well. And so it's like a stop-start energy. The thing to do is really just take it in your stride, really, because when you think about it, you've lived your life every year, and there's been a minimum of 4 eclipses every year of your life until now, and you're still here, so it can't be that bad. So I think there are positive things that it can bring in. You know, you could say if it does bring dramatic changes, maybe those changes were needed. You really needed them, and that you were holding back, and this eclipse energy just pushed the trigger in that direction that you needed to go anyway. And you might be thanking, looking back, 6 months after, you'd be thinking, oh, great, that. I often compare an eclipse to a revolving door, because it's like you go in one side, but you can't guarantee that you come out the same door on the other side. And then when you look back, you think, oh, how did that? You went through that revolving door. And so it could be events or people that come in and out of your life. But this is happening all the time. I think we don't always notice that we meet people or we have connections and then they disappear for whatever reason. And that, I think, could be related to eclipses. But we just get so used to the fact that people come and go, or events come and go, and then 6 months after an event, you can barely remember the details of what went on. You have to keep detailed diaries to check sometimes.
But also, it's all down to change, isn't it? And I know a lot of people don't like change. They want the same
Sure.
thing to happen because they feel safe and secure. Where I think a lot of people on my channel, since they're coming from the Gurdjieff kind of point of view, are trying to be aware of change. So this is
Yeah.
like, we're not saying it's a warning, but you can be aware that there's eclipse coming. Or if you could look back in your life and see when eclipses were and see what the changes were, when you're aware, you're more prepared, aren't you? Or
Yeah.
look for opportunities that are going to come up, or like, oh, I'm changing because this has happened.
Yeah. So it goes on all the time. If you're into self-development at all, change is part of the course. You have to enact change and deal with it. Too much change, though, too radically, too quickly, I agree, can be very disturbing, and we get very unsettled by it. And I can understand why people want to cling on to certainties, but it's looking increasingly like a lot of the certainties that we believed in are not necessarily true anymore.
Things are
So
being shaken.
there's a big shake-up. And with Pluto square to the nodes, I think that is definitely saying to the collective, there's a massive need to change and to let go of things. Just, you may not feel like the same person after the eclipses than you were before. And that's okay, but it can be a bit scary.
As an astrologer, could someone like get in touch with you because they know there's an eclipse coming up? Can you do a chart to see how that eclipse would
Yeah.
help or fix
So
them?
the way astrologers do it is we compare the time of the date of birth. You need to have your birth time, and then you create a bi-wheel chart and you put the eclipse by its time and date and compare the alignments. And I think it gets very exciting when your sun is right on the same degree as the eclipse. I can see why people get very excited about that. That means your whole year is going to be changed somehow. And I don't mean to be negative, but a friend of mine in 2020 who had similar birth time to me died suddenly, and she had the eclipse right bang on her sun that year. So it did catch my attention. I thought, oh, but at the same time, I also had that was on my degree as well. So you can't say automatically there's going to be some terrible fated event. But it did strike me as quite an important point of change, and for whatever reason can have good or bad effects, that happen suddenly. So that's one thing to keep in mind about eclipses. But with this Aries energy, I think the impact is to increase your pioneer spirit. Whatever you're doing that is very independent, and you don't need to consult other people to do it. You want to just strike out on your own. This is very Aryan, so it could give a booster to all of that. Maybe a lot of people are too afraid to do that, and this energy might give them a bit of a booster to do more on their own, kind of thing. But again, you've got to consider that if you keep doing that, it can get out of balance very easily, and that it's okay to ask for help sometimes and consult with other people and get feedback. It also marks the beginning of the Mercury retrograde. So, basically by next Thursday, everything will change, at least astrologically, but probably in the world as well. So you've got the eclipse, 29 degrees of Aries. Then you've got the end of Ramadan, and you've got the beginning of the Mercury retrograde, and the sun moves into Taurus. So by the end of next week, we're probably not going to be in the same place, at least psychologically.
So firstly, I think it's the 20th, isn't it? Firstly, the 20th is going to be an important day astrologically, but at the same time, we should still continue our lives, normal way, but be aware of what's going
It's
on.
every year. Every year something like this happens, but we probably don't notice. But I think it's good to notice and make appropriate adjustments and modifications as needed. So then we're in what's called the eclipse corridor, because they happen in pairs. So you've got, once one is done, you've got to wait for the other one before you can sink into relief into your armchair and think, oh my God, that's the eclipses are gone. Not necessarily. Well, there are two more coming in October, November. So sometimes dramatic events happen between the two eclipses. So there's the solar eclipse, which is a new moon, and then there's a full moon 2 weeks later. So that sort of ties in with the lunar cycle. Every 2 weeks there's a dramatic shift. And this one, lunar eclipses, they say, are more emotional because the moon is connected with the hidden astral and hidden planes. So the psychic energies, the emotional energies, the shifting tides, shadowy stuff in our psyches that we may not, have been aware of, that come to light suddenly because of the eclipse. Again, it's all stuff you may be dealing with anyway. And this one is on May the 5th. So I think that is this Friday.
It's a Friday, yes, because I'm doing a big walk in London on Friday with some friends of the 5th of May.
Yeah. And there's a certain event happening the day after,
Yes.
I'm not concerned about something called a coronation or something like that. But it is remarkable that this is happening more or less on an eclipse. And there are lots of different theories I'm not going to go into. So the lunar eclipse, this one will be visible again, quite close to the solar eclipse again. It's over Southeast Asia, a bit further north, more across the Indian Ocean. So it'll be basically the Maldives and Seychelles, that area, and some parts of Indonesia and Southeast Asia as well. But this one, it's not as dramatic in a way because it's at night time, because it's only the Earth coming between the moon and the sun, so it's just like a shadow across the moon. Sometimes you don't see it as the solar eclipses are much more dramatic,
Mm.
because it's like the light switching off. Or in the case of that one in 2015, it was like suddenly somebody switched off the heating and the temperature dropped, like going off a cliff. It's very dramatic. Um, but a lunar eclipse can just look red, and it's penumbral because it's not complete. It doesn't completely go out. You can see it go dark, and because moonlight sometimes can be a lot brighter than you think. So you'd have to look more carefully for the lunar eclipse.
Yeah, that last full moon was a very bright full moon. I was quite stunned at how bright it was, and many people were commenting on it.
Yeah.
So I knew it wasn't just me that had noticed that.
Yeah, well, they talk about the perigee and apogee. So apogee is the furthest away, perigee is closest to distance to the Earth. It does vary, by distance when the moon is slightly closer to the Earth. So it can have the appearance of being bigger, but some people say no, it doesn't. It's not necessarily bigger, but it can appear brighter, a lot brighter at those periods. So they call those a supermoon. But there are lots of supermoons every year.
Mm. Mm.
It's not unusual, and that term itself is quite a modern term. It wasn't even. It was only coined, I think, back in 1980s. So it's quite a recent concept that we have, like a supermoon. Um, the moon's always worth watching anyway. I think it's one of the biggest mysteries. You
Yeah.
stare at it and you wonder, what the hell is that?
Yes,
It baffles me
absolutely.
even to this day. I'm thinking, well, even though what astrology says about it is very potent and useful, when you look at the actual object in the sky, you think that we still don't know what it
Mm.
is. It
I
looks
find
like
it. I
like
sorry.
this. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say I go out and look at it quite a lot, and I sometimes find when it's coming to a full moon or is a full moon, there's like a dark band round
Mhm.
it, and I find that, and people tell me it's the aura of the moon, and then other times it's like a very faint, I call it like peacock colours
Yeah,
round it. I
I
find
think
that
there
all
is
just
a thing called
fascinating.
a
Yeah.
coronal effect.
Mm.
I think with the sun, you can get what they call a double corona. Sometimes if you see that, like two halos, and that's amazing. Like rainbows, you can get a double or treble rainbow.
That might be where people think there's the two suns idea comes from.
Yeah, but physics might explain it by the angle and the refraction of light.
Mm.
Forming a kind of tunnel so that the light just keeps uh, echoing.
Our
So
time's going
this,
to run out in a minute.
yeah, okay.
We've got a
So
couple of minutes. So I don't know if you want to mention your website. Oh, we've got a couple of minutes.
well, just to say that this lunar eclipse is the follow-up to the solar eclipse, and it could have, because it's in Taurus, it's 15 degrees Taurus, Scorpio, it's going to wrap up the end of the nodes being in Taurus and Scorpio. Then in July, they move into Aries and Libra. So it's kind of the tail end of all the stuff about banking and value, the impact on banking, yeah. There's so much more you could say about eclipses. So I think just, take it in your stride. And yeah, my website is the same. It's proteusastrology.co.uk. And there's no point looking out for the eclipse because we won't see it. But I think it will be on video somewhere. It's worth, watching it for those who have the ability to see it because they're incredible phenomena, celestial phenomena, and quite exciting, I think, to see them. How do you
Yeah,
feel
I've seen
about
a few. I've seen a solar eclipse in Wales, and we used to go and look at lunar eclipses all the time whenever we could. I spent
it?
a
Yeah,
lot of time in Wales, and I remember as a kid we all got to watch them, the solar eclipse, and we all had to wear them special glasses.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So if
It's
you
it's
can go
great
and
if you
see it,
can. It's great if you can see it, but
mm,
this one, no, I don't think so. Not here if you're living here, except
well,
on video.
yeah.
If you look on the internet, you'll probably see it. So yeah, I mean, So Aries and Taurus are going to be triggered. So if you are an Aries or a Taurus, it could impact you more directly because it's in your sign. But again, it depends on the exact degrees. But I'm looking forward to them. I think we need change. But again, too much change does feel a bit anxiety filled somehow.
It can, but we've got to be aware of what this change is that's happening. Like after all you've said, it's kind of made a lot of sense for my last week. And I just feel like there's a new dawn happening. There's a new dawn coming for people.
Yeah, new beginnings. So you could argue this eclipse is about new beginnings, forging forward with your new path and letting go of all the previous stuff.
Right, this is going to cut out. So I want to say thank you very much, Kieron, because I'd like to try and get
again. Thank you.
So people get in touch with Kieron at Proteus Astrology website. I'll put a link to it.
Great.
Thank you.
And enjoy the eclipses.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Oh, why is it not stopping?